Today we're going to talk about a few really hot topics in skin cancer prevention, both what we should be thinking about and what we should be doing, and also try to dispel some of the myths that are floating out there about how to protect your skin. And we're going to talk about why prevention and what those strategies look like. We're going to talk about the safety of sunscreen. I get that question a lot from my patients. We're going to talk about photoprotection and vitamin D. And then a little bit on some supplements and dietary changes that might be important for preventing skin cancer or modifying some risk factors there. And then we'll give you a little update on the tanning bed regulations as they stand currently. So sorry about the annoying slide here, but this is, oops, I'm going backwards here. The sun is basically a known carcinogen, right? It expels this UV light, and the World Health Organization has declared ultraviolet light from either the sun or from artificial sources like tanning beds a known carcinogen, meaning it causes cancer. In fact, tanning bed legislation now has to have a Surgeon General's warning on it, and it has to display signs that say this will cause cancer, and it will. And just like we have seen now for many years on packs of cigarettes. So that has been a good change in the right direction. And as dermatologists, I talk a lot about how to prevent skin cancer and how to protect your skin from the sun. I really believe it's not about being a hermit and staying inside and like living in a cave. I think the sun is wonderful. It's kind of like everything that's good in life, right? Everything in moderation. I think you have to be smart, but you shouldn't shy away from doing what you love and doing what you love with who you love, right? So you just have to be very smart and prepared about how you do it so you don't pay for it later, okay? So the sun is emitting several types of ultraviolet radiation. The ultraviolet C rays, which are not depicted on my little cartoon here, are actually stopped by the ozone in our atmosphere, and we're very lucky that they don't actually reach the Earth's surface, so we don't have to worry about those right now. But we do still have to worry about the ultraviolet B and the ultraviolet A rays. The UVB rays are the burning rays, so B for burning, and that's the rays we're most familiar with because that's the rays that really start to make our skin red and painful and make our vacations kind of uncomfortable sometimes if we're not prepared. So we're all pretty aware of that. The UVA rays are also reaching the Earth's surface and thus our skin, and they penetrate actually deeper into the second layer of skin. These are the aging rays, so A for aging. They are responsible for attacking those lovely structures in our dermis, the second layer of skin, the collagen that gives great structure to the skin and creates premature wrinkling and signs of aging. They are also responsible for increasing our risk for skin cancer, including the deadliest form of skin cancer, melanoma. So both of these rays are really, really important. When we talk about sun protection and sunscreen and protective clothing, a lot of what these are doing is blocking those rays from entering the skin, or the chemical sunscreens are actually absorbing them so that the structures in our skin don't have to take the brunt of that radiation. So several ways we're getting our UV exposure here on Earth. One of the ways is this excessive cumulative sun exposure that will increase your risk for skin cancer down the road. So that's the everyday sun that we get from walking around town, from going to the grocery store, or just walking down city streets. That sun over time does collect and accumulate, and the more you get, the more risk you have for developing precancers and skin cancers down the line, okay? If everyone puts out their arms in front of them and turns one palm up and one palm down, take a look at your forearms. If you're wearing long sleeves, you'll have to lift them up. And just take a look. There's probably a difference in the skin color and complexion that you're seeing and the texture of the skin there on the top of the forearm compared to the bottom for a lot of us. That is the cumulative sun exposure right there. The forearm that's on the underside when your palm is up, that's more like your baby skin. That's how we all started. And our tops of our forearms used to look like that and feel like that too. But with really low levels of cumulative sun exposure over year after year, we do start to get these changes. And these changes add up over time. And then the early childhood sunburns we have learned are very, very important in creating risk for skin cancer down the line. And this is really tough for me because when I was growing up, we didn't know any better, right? My parents were good parents, but they didn't know how to protect my skin as best they could. You know, and if they would have been as good as parents are now, I would have had a lot less risk going forward. So I can't change that past, but I can be better moving forward. But we do know if you've had a lot of sunburns as a child or young adult, that does increase your risk for skin cancer. As it turns out, if you've had very severe sunburns, including ones that are so bad that they leave water-filled blisters on the skin, so blistering sunburns, those are even worse and increase your risk even further for developing skin cancers down the line. And then the chronic continuous sun exposure, that's like our workers that are continuously outside, landscapers, construction workers. That type of sun exposure over the course of a working lifetime does put those workers at increased risk for skin cancer especially. So they have an increased risk as well. And then this one I think is very, very important for our community, the intermittent sun exposure, intermittent sunburns. This is like when we sit in the gray winter and we just can't wait to run off to Hawaii or Arizona for a week in the middle of winter, and all of a sudden our unprotected skin sees a lot of sun all at once, and we get those intermittent sunburns. Turns out those are really, really bad for us, even if it's just happening once every year or so. That increases your risk for melanoma especially. So intermittent sunburns are a really bad idea. And by the way, the idea of a base tan, which was a thing when I was growing up, is not a thing anymore, okay? So there's no such thing as a safe tan. So I don't want anyone thinking going to a tanning bed for a week or two before they go to see that intermittent bright sunshine is a good idea. If you're seeing tan on the skin, that is your cell's ways of telling you they're getting DNA damage from too much sun exposure. So it's a way to just be aware that you need to be doing something more to protect your skin, okay? And then of course, tanning bed exposure absolutely increases your risk of skin cancer. You might hear me say that a few times today, but I think it's really important to understand it's a known carcinogen, just like the ultraviolet rays coming from the sun. It's predominantly UVA rays, so those aging rays, but the rays that also penetrate deeper into the skin and lead to increased risk of skin cancer, especially melanoma. I see a lot of young, especially young women, that have dealt with really advanced melanoma and they're otherwise completely healthy, and the only thing that they've done wrong is gone tanning. And probably before we didn't know, but we're really learning this is not a good thing to do. So today, 1 in 5 of us Americans will get skin cancer, and that's a pretty high number. So 20% of the people in this room, or 20% of Americans, will develop a type of skin cancer in their lifetime, which is a lot. And a lot of these cases of skin cancer are what we call non-melanoma skin cancer. So basal cell skin cancers, you can see the pearly little bump on the nose is really classic for a basal cell. A little subtle but slowly growing scar-like bump or plaque on the skin could be a sign of basal cell skin cancer. These kind of eroded sores that just won't heal, or they'll scab up and then they'll kind of heal, but then they kind of cycle back around. That's a sign of skin cancer, like basal cell skin cancer. And then these funny little shiny pink patches or spots on the skin, especially the trunk or the extremities. They don't really bump up, but they just don't really go away, and they don't belong. You look at that little spot there on the bottom left and you think, that just shouldn't be there, right? Those are signs of basal cell skin cancer or non-melanoma skin cancer, and these should get checked by a board-certified dermatologist to be diagnosed and treated. When caught early, basal cell skin cancers are almost always curative. They are very slow growing, but they do cause a lot of annoying appointments, surgeries, scars. This is not something you want to be battling day in and day out in your retirement, right? You want to be doing much more fun things, right? That's why we're working so hard right now, not to come see me every couple months. The other type of non-melanoma skin cancer that is pretty common is squamous cell skin cancer. And this skin cancer can be more deadly than basal cell skin cancer in the right setting. So some people are surprised to learn that you can actually have pretty advanced squamous cell skin cancer, especially if it arises on the head and neck or on the mucous membranes, which are like the wet parts of your skin around the lips or inside the mouth or in the throat. And this skin cancer is also, like basal cell skin cancer, related to the more sun you get, the more risk you get, okay? And then melanoma is kind of the big three skin cancers, basal cell, squamous cell, and melanoma skin cancers. It's the most deadly form of skin cancer. And the reason it's so deadly is because it has a knack for moving. It doesn't like to just stay on the skin. So it can travel to your lymph nodes, to your lungs, to your liver, to your brain, much more frequently than the other types of skin cancers. And that's how it gets us into trouble, okay? There have been amazing advancements in the last 5 or 10 years for therapy for melanoma and other types of very advanced skin cancer. However, I will tell you, prevention is still so much easier than treatment. It's not something you want to have to do battle with if you can help it and prevent now. And so knowing what to look for, I think, is really important, because if you can detect these early, they are curative. If you can detect them in the early stages, you won't have to go on and deal with these traveling skin cancers that can ultimately kill you. So when we talk about melanoma detection, we talk about the ABCDs. How many of you guys have heard about the ABCDs of melanoma? Great. Yeah, it's a good health campaign. I like it. I liked the addition that they included not too long ago of the ABCDEs of melanoma, and I'll tell you why in just a little bit. But A stands for asymmetry. So if you look at a spot and you cannot fold it over on itself and make it sort of make both halves match, that's an asymmetrical spot, and that should get checked. If the B borders are irregular or kind of scalloped or notched, that's a sign it may be up to something and should get checked. C for color. So if you develop a very dark color all of a sudden in one of your moles, or something looks just so much darker than anything else that you make on your skin, that's a sign it should get checked. Or if it starts to develop multiple colors, so like reds and tans and browns and blacks and blues and grays, that's no good, right? So we need to get that checked. D for diameter, so things that are worrisome typically, but not always, tend to be a little bit larger or are growing larger. So something that's bigger than a pencil eraser is something that is good to keep in mind. So over 5 or 6 millimeters should get checked by a dermatologist, especially if you haven't had it for a long time and know it well and it's staying stable. Which brings us to E for evolution. So anything on your skin that's changing, something that's new, that doesn't look like it belongs to you, something that was always there minding its own business and then starts to change in whatever way, whether it be an A, B, C, D type of way, or maybe it was just sitting there and all of a sudden it starts itching all the time. Well, that's kind of weird. That should get checked out. If it starts bleeding or scabbing or growing or changing colors, any change, you don't have to judge it. Is that a good change or a bad change? If you can identify a change, though, that is about 90% of the battle. That's your cue to call your doctor and have it looked at, and perhaps have it checked out under the microscope to see if you need to have it an early diagnosis, and which is, again, curative. So that's the name of the game: prevention and early detection, okay? As it turns out, a lot of our skin cancers are on the rise, including melanoma. So we have seen kind of a steady uptick in new cases that have been diagnosed, but the death rate of melanoma has stayed pretty steady. That's what you see, the line in the bottom. And that's relatively good news. That means that we're probably detecting more melanomas, which is not good news, but probably detecting them early. So we've kind of got the hang of finding them early, and patients are understanding what to look for and when to get checked, and that's really, really important. The name of the game is to stay away from that bottom line, right? So get things checked early. We see about over 90,000 new cases in 2018 of melanoma. That's the latest data from the SEER database. And that is about 5.3% of all cancers are melanoma. So that's all comers like breast cancer, colon cancer, everything like that. So it's a small percentage, but we still see a lot of mortality or deaths from melanoma. So in 2018, we're estimating over 9,000 people will die from melanoma. And that's a small percent of all cancer deaths, but a lot of these are preventable, right? Which is why you're here today to talk more about prevention. And it's important to us, right? Because we think we're protected here in this corner of the Northwest, but it turns out this corner of the country has some of the highest rates of melanoma anywhere. If we looked at the western part of our state, which you think, oh, maybe that sunny eastern side of our state is really bringing us down. It's not. If you just looked at the Puget Sound area, so western Washington with all of its gray and clouds, we would have number 4 rates of melanoma if we lined up with all the rest of the states. So there's something going on here in the Pacific Northwest little corner of our country, and there's something going on here in the Puget Sound, western Washington. So this is a definite topic that's near and dear to my heart, as I've taken care of more melanoma patients and diagnosed more melanoma here than anywhere else I've ever practiced. It's also something that I think all of us should be aware of, because we're not as protected as we might think we are. I think it's very deceptive climate. I think we all think, oh my God, you know, what sun? I'll believe it when I see it, right? And it's true. It's hiding behind a lot of clouds, but remember those UVA rays that penetrate deep into the skin and are really put us at risk for melanoma type of skin cancer. They're penetrating through those clouds like no problem. All day long, all year round. So you're not seeing that peak sun hours that we talk about sometimes, you know, avoid the peak sun hours from 10 to 4 or 10 to 2. That's for UVB rays. That's to prevent sunburns. But it doesn't help you protect against UVA rays. You have to do more than just stay out of the sun during those hours, okay? And it has to be a year-round habit or commitment if you're really trying to avoid a lot of that exposure. I think a lot of my patients are very active and very healthy in so many other ways, but they sort of forget that they have to be really great about their sun protection, especially when they're doing their activities outside all day long, in high altitudes, and amongst an environment that's highly reflective. So snow, sand, water, those surfaces are going to be reflecting UV light from all kinds of different angles, not just coming up from above. So you have to be really cognizant about that and really be prepared to protect your skin no matter where it's coming from you, okay? So let's talk a little bit about ways that we can protect our skin. And hopefully this won't be any new information in the next few slides. But one thing I do find people forget a lot about is their eyes. So UV light also will cause problems for the eyes. It will increase your risk for cataracts and other eye problems. And it also can lead to skin cancers around the eyes and that very delicate skin of the eyelids. Talk about high-priced real estate. This is not where you want to be having skin surgery to remove skin cancer after skin cancer later on. So preventing that is a really, really big deal. Even if they're tiny little skin cancers, the surgery or the treatment can be a big problem. So sunglasses should be blocking UV light at 99 to 100%. And I also find it very difficult to get that sunscreen all the way up to the tippy edge of my eyelids without it actually burning after a little while. So sunglasses are kind of the name of the game there. Find the shade and use it. So if you've got the option at the beach or the pool, get under that umbrella and still enjoy all the sights and sounds and feels of being outside with your friends and being out in a vacation environment, but you don't have to take the 100% of the brunt of that sunshine, okay? If you've got the option of walking down the shady side of the street versus the very, very sunny side of the street, take it. It matters. Remember I talked to you about the cumulative sun exposure over time leading to precancers and skin cancers? These little decisions made over and over the course of a lifetime really matter, okay? And like we just talked about, use extra caution when you're up in high elevations or you're playing out in very reflective surfaces. That makes a big difference. I've seen some of the worst sunburns in people that have been out skiing on a cloudy day, kind of like late spring, wasn't thinking about it, and just sort of forgot to sort of do all the sun protective measures that they usually would do, and really, really paid for it. So be careful out there during those times. And I love, love, love a good floppy hat. So 3 inches or more is what you want to look for your brim. And baseball caps are okay, but they're not great. They're gonna protect your scalp pretty well and a little bit of your face and eyes, but they're not gonna help you protect your ears and your neck and some of those other very vulnerable places that love to collect sunshine. So think about a wide-brimmed hat whenever it's possible. For the athletes out there, I know it's not always feasible, but there's a lot of different styles and a lot of different techniques to keep it on there. And if you can just sort of resign yourself to become a hat person, I think it's a great idea, really great investment for your future. And the other one of my favorite things is sun protective clothing. How many of you guys are already using sun protective clothing? Yeah, some of you, but I think some people still don't know that this is a thing or that it's such a great thing. When it comes to protecting the skin, the exposed areas, you can either protect it by covering it up, right? But not all clothing is equal. And it's really hard to sort of look at clothing in a closet and sort of decide what would be the UPF or ultraviolet protection factor of that piece of clothing, unless it's been tested and it actually tells you on the label. So you'd really be chancing it. If you took a white t-shirt and got it wet, it would have a UPF that would be equivalent to like an SPF 4 for sunscreen. In which case I would say, I don't know, why bother, right? I mean, who's using SPF 4 these days? That was when I was growing up, that was the thing. But the UPF factor is sort of the clothing's version of SPF, like we see on sunscreens. And you want to look on the label for UPF 50 plus, okay? Forget all the what good, the very good, we want excellent, okay? A UPF 50 plus is going to block out 98% of the rays, and then you don't really have to worry about gooping up sunscreen underneath that clothing. To me, that's a win. That's just easy, and that's working smarter, not harder, right? So I think these are great investments. They have come a really long way as far as how fashionable they are and how modified they are to fit so many different activities. Now my fishermen, my mountain climbers actually have great options for UPF clothing, whereas before, I mean, we were having to get real creative. I mean, how do you climb up a mountain and reapply sunscreen every 2 hours with your, when your hands can't be sticky or greasy? So this is a great, great option, okay? And then that brings me to sunscreen. So when you're looking for sunscreen, first of all, we know it works. We know it helps prevent premature aging and it prevents skin cancer. It's been shown to be able to do those two jobs. Those are the two jobs I want my sunscreen to be able to do, number 1 and number 2. When I'm looking for sunscreen, I'm going to be looking for 3 different things on the bottle label, okay? One of them is that it is broad spectrum. That means it's not just going to block the burning rays, the UVB, but it's also been demonstrated to block the UVA rays, which is sort of the trickiest part of the spectrum for the manufacturers to figure out. So broad spectrum. They cannot put that on the label unless they've proven that to be the case, okay? The other thing I'm going to be looking for is the SPF number. I want an SPF of 30 or above. That's going to block 97% of the UV light. After 30, you get kind of diminishing returns, and I'll show you a little chart after that. The problem, though, is that we don't know how to use sunscreen correctly. So the way we typically use sunscreen does not give us enough protection that equals the label number that you're going to see on the bottle. So to protect yourself from yourself, you may want to think about upping the ante when it comes to that number if you're going to be going to a particularly sunny climate like Hawaii or Arizona, or you're going to be out all day doing activities. Up it to an SPF 50 or above, okay? And that number is going to help give you a little more bang for your buck when you really, really need it. For your everyday, SPF 30 or above is perfect. That's where I want you to be. For women, I want you not to just focus on the 8x10. We're really good about that, but I want you also to bring that lotion down to the neck. Don't forget the ears. And a lot of us wear fashions, especially this time of year, that are going to expose the front of our chest. I see a lot of sun damage that gets sort of accumulated here and on the neck. So I may not be able to tell how old you are by looking at your face these days, because Botox and good makeup and lasers and this and that, but I can almost always tell by looking at a neck, okay? So don't make that mistake. Prevent now and you won't have that problem. The third thing I'm going to look for is either the name water resistant or very water resistant, okay? And what's the difference? Well, if it says water resistant, that allows you to use that product pretty confidently within 40 minutes before you need to reapply, okay? If it's a very water resistant, you got about 80 minutes. Doesn't matter which one you use, if you get out of the swimming pool or you're done being wet, you're sweating, you're swimming, you do have to reapply all of these products, okay? Even if it says water resistant. You're going to have a really hard time finding something that says waterproof anymore, because it's basically become an illegal situation, because that was a very deceptive thing to put on the label. Nothing is perfectly waterproof. It is water resistant. It does buy you some extra protection in wet environments or if you're very, very sweaty and doing a lot of activities, but it's not perfect. So make sure you're reapplying every couple hours, okay? So SPF, if you take a look at the SPF 15 to 100, there's not a big, big difference. I mean, going from 0 to 30 is huge, right? That's where I want you to be for your everyday. But after that, you get a little less bang for your buck. You are getting more chemicals, okay? So if you don't need them, maybe less is more. Depends on kind of where you fall on that. But if you are going to be in those very intense sunshine areas, you may want to increase to up to 50 or above, because I do think we aren't using enough. So how much is enough sunscreen to expose areas of skin, because that's the #1 problem that we're running into. It's a shot glass full of sunscreen. And I don't know if you've ever filled up a shot glass with sunscreen. That's a lot. It's like a lot of goop. And so most people are not coming even close to putting that much sunscreen on when they apply in the morning or when they reapply. But that's how much it takes. That means you should be going through a bottle of sunscreen pretty quickly, especially if you're on a sunny beach vacation. But most people probably aren't seeing like half the bottle gone, right? So that's why we're getting into trouble when it comes to what we're noticing as far as how much protection we're getting on our skin when we're actually out there. Are we still seeing a tan or sometimes a burn? But I put my sunscreen on, I don't know what happened. This is probably what you ran into. The other thing that most people will run into is that they're not reapplying every couple hours or after they sweat or they swim, okay? Those are the two biggies. And I get asked this a lot, is SPF 100 really better than SPF 50? Well, theoretically, no, right? I showed you that chart, it's really not. But that's in lab conditions. In real life conditions, they just did a study about 1.5 years ago where they took about 200 guys that were up in high altitudes skiing on highly reflective surfaces. They gave them 2 bottles, A and B, or they didn't tell them what it was. But one was SPF 100, they put it on half their face. The other was SPF 50, put it on the other half their face. And they told them, knock yourself out, go have fun today. And they came back and then they had dermatologists take a look at how much sunburn they were getting on either side of the face. And it turns out the SPF 100 protected them almost twice as better than the SPF 50 in those real life conditions. So I think sometimes we need to, again, protect ourselves from ourselves, give ourselves a little extra boost or cushion with that extra number in those situations. But then here's the question I get as well, is sunscreen really safe? I have patients that are high-risk patients for skin cancer. Maybe they've already dealt with skin cancer, and they're still really hesitant to use it. They're really, really worried, and some of them are not using it because they're worried about some of the claims they've read on the internet or some of the myths that are kind of floating around out there. So I wanted to kind of go over just a few of them and talk about what do we know and what do we not know, and whether or not we think sunscreen is safe to use. So first we'll talk about what does the internet say. Your sunscreen may give you cancer, okay? And this came from an environmental working group statement after they looked at some toxicology reports saying that an ingredient in many, many sunscreens called retinol palmitate actually can cause cancer in petri dishes or lab animals. As it turns out, there's no reports in humans that that's a problem. As it turns out, retinol palmitate is a form of vitamin A. It's just a cousin. In a real biological system in our skin, it's actually converted into vitamin A. It's an antioxidant, and essentially depends on how you study those. But if you put it in a not biological system, you can make an antioxidant shift over to a reactive, free radical species and make it actually, cancer causing in the right setting. You can push any antioxidant that direction essentially because of just how the chemistry works. So it wasn't very well studied, but the claims got pretty big. How many of you guys have seen that Hawaii is kind of first in the world making legislature about banning certain types of sunscreens? This is really important, especially because we like to run off to Hawaii, and of course we're going to go and protect our skin while we do it, right? So Hawaii is trying to ban a couple of different ingredients. Oxybenzone is one of them that have been shown in limited studies, but some convincing evidence that they may lead to increased bleaching of coral reefs. So if you care about the environment and sort of the world around us, I think that could be potentially very, very important. It's certainly important to people that live in Hawaii, and that's obviously their playground and their industry for tourism. As it turns out, remember I said there's nothing waterproof when it comes to sunscreens? We are swimming in these waters, and that sunscreen is not sticking to our skin and staying there, right? That's why we have to reapply when we get out of the water. Turns out there are lots and lots and lots of sunscreens left over in that marine environment, and they have shown that there may be some harm to marine life and to the coral reefs. And that's the evidence that they're working with right now in Hawaii, trying to make some policy. If this does continue to go through, which it looks like they're moving towards, it looks like January 1st of 2021 is when they will stop distribution of sunscreens containing oxybenzone and another chemical. And I don't know if they'll be enforcing it like on the beach. I don't know if there'll be like a sunscreen policeman that comes by and like wants to see your ingredient list or something. Me, I don't know. But that's something to be aware of. So right now, the reef-safe sunscreens are probably better, and the ones that are very broad spectrum so that they'll really protect your skin are probably the physical blocking sunscreens, your zinc oxide and your titanium dioxide. Now stay tuned, because it turns out there may be some evidence that very nanoparticle zinc oxide and titanium dioxide can get eaten up by tiny little marine creatures, and it causes some problems with their development. So there may be some restrictions on how nano those nanoparticles get. And a lot of startups right now that are also really involved in this legislation and very pro these laws are pushing for more like non-nanotechnology, zinc oxide, titanium dioxide type of physical blockers that don't have these other chemicals, which brings us right back to those white zinc oxide noses from the lifeguards when we were growing up, right? So stay tuned. I think this is going to be an evolving story, but really important, and I think it's really setting a precedent for the rest of the world, truly. So I get a lot of patients that ask me, what about my 15 minutes in the sun? And I say, knock yourself out, just wear your sunscreen. And they say, no, my doctor tells me I should go out there and get non-protected 10 or 15 minutes of sun. But I'll tell you, I don't know how many minutes are safe a number of minutes for any given individual. I also know that getting your vitamin D through your skin is not very predictable, and it's not necessarily the best way to do it. I also think that having a good amount of vitamin D, a healthy amount of vitamin D, is important for skeletal health. And I'm very biased. I think the skin is the most important organ, but I do think skeletal health is important too. So if you are being amazing at protecting your skin from the sun, you probably are at risk for having low vitamin D. Now it turns out, remember, us humans aren't that good at using all this sun protection that well, not as good as we think we are, so we're probably not really at risk. But if you're really on this stuff, you probably are. So you do need to be paying attention to the recommended daily allowances for vitamin D and supplementation. And I want you to get your vitamin D, but I want you to eat it. I don't want you to think about getting it from the sun. You don't need to, and it's not a reliable way to do it. When they tested a whole bunch of surfers out on the beach and said, well, if anyone's got great vitamin D, it's these guys. Let's see what a really great vitamin D level looks like. When they tested them, some people were normal, some were high, some were low. So you just can't really tell what you're going to get when it comes from the sunshine through the skin. The American Academy of Dermatology also has a position statement on vitamin D, and I fall right in line with this. And it does mention that you want to get adequate vitamin D, but you should get it through a healthy diet, essentially, okay? If you're worried about low vitamin D levels, you should see your primary care doctor and have them checked and talk to them about that. There may be some other ways to supplement beyond just dietary sources too. I get a lot of questions around here about whether there is something natural or dietary that can protect you from skin cancer. And I think it's a great question. And we have some answers. We don't have all the answers. I think it's another evolving story, but something that could potentially be an adjunct to your sun protection that we've already talked about. But none of this do I think should be used alone, okay? I think it still should be used in conjunction with hats and sunscreen and sun protective clothing and sunglasses. All those things are going to be your foundation. But let's talk about it. So a lot of natural ingredients with health benefits are working because they help to boost the antioxidant levels. So one thing that people will do or try to sell are the antioxidants for sun protection. And using serums or sunscreens that also include vitamin C or vitamin E are the typical ones that you'll see. May actually have some increased benefit for protecting your skin from the sun, especially to kind of scavenge up all those free radicals that the UV light is producing in the skin. You can't simply eat your vitamin C or vitamin E. It doesn't quite get to the level of the skin where you need to have it to protect you from those UV rays. So you do have to apply it topically. If you're so inclined, I think it's just fine. I don't think you necessarily need to do it on top of your sunscreen. You shouldn't be doing it instead of your sunscreen. Does that make sense? So it may be helpful kind of as an adjunct if you really like lotions and potions. But again, it's going to be more chemicals. And if you're a less is more person, then stick with the sunscreen and forget the serums. And there's this really interesting story about a fern that can protect you from the sun. And it turns out this, what used to be an aquatic fern, so it lived in the water, and over evolution and time in the Earth's history, it sort of evolved to creep out of the water and onto land. Well, to be able to do that, it had to learn to protect itself from the sun's UV rays. It didn't need it when it was sitting in the water, but all of a sudden it needed to have some strategies. So it turns out this fern actually has some compounds that when either eaten in a supplement as humans or put on the skin topically, like in its ingredients in sunscreen, can actually change how much sun is required for you to burn your skin. So it actually probably has a protective effect. It's been around for a long time. It's been FDA approved or over the counter for a really long time, has great safety data. And it's been more recently studied in much more vigorous studies, and we're looking at it for lots of health conditions that may be caused by the sun. So some people get actual like rashes or allergies to the sun, and this supplement's been tested in that. It's been tested in high-risk melanoma patients, and it does change the amount of sunshine that is needed to create a burn or a problem within their skin. So there's probably something going on here. It should not be used instead of sunscreen or sun protective clothing. It's derived from the fern called Polypodium leucotomus, and there's a lot of different brand names here in the United States, but you can just order it on Amazon Prime right now and probably be at your doorstep by the time you get home. And Fern Block or Heliocare, those are two of the more popular types of brand names, but you're looking for Polypodium leucotomus. That's the scientific name of this particular fern. It should be used, again, in addition to sunscreen, not instead. So since we're in Seattle and coffee is near and dear to our heart too, there was a cool study out of 2015 that said, well, maybe coffee actually decreases our risk for melanoma. And the jury's not completely out yet, but I would say anything that sort of backs up my habit for drinking caffeine, I'm going to run with. And this was a big, kind of a huge prospective cohort study looking at over 400,000 people in this big database who were cancer-free at baseline, and then they looked to see, well, how many of that many people went on to form melanoma? And then of the people that got melanoma versus those that didn't, what were their coffee or caffeine habits like? And that's basically the study. So that's as much as they kind of studied. They did not look at confounding risk factors, like who had family history of melanoma, who had blistering sunburns as a kid, who has red hair and freckles. None of that was taken into account. Just did they drink a lot of coffee and how much, and did they get melanoma? Okay, so that's all we're working with here. But as it turns out, they found out that people who drank a lot of coffee, not just a little coffee, might have a protective benefit from skin cancer. So we're talking 4 cups or more, and below that there didn't seem to be any difference. So if you have a big coffee habit, maybe carry on. I'm not here to tell you to stop, at least. But the jury, again, is still out. It does jive with other types of studies that are done in animals and in the lab that shows that caffeine in particular has beneficial properties against tumor cells, including melanoma. So I think there's probably something to it. I think over time we're gonna like parse this out and maybe harness this for even better good. But for now, keep enjoying the Joe, okay? And then one other thing that I'll talk about with regard to dietary, if you're really interested in doing what you can or to prevent your risk or lower your risk for skin cancer, I thought this was pretty interesting. So this was a 2016 article talking about citrus consumption and risk of cutaneous melanoma. So again, the most deadly form of skin cancer. And does it matter how much citrus fruit you eat? And does that increase or decrease your risk? So as it turns out, citrus fruits have chemicals in them that actually make you more sensitive to sun. So like the opposite of that cool fern that I just told you about. And that's why if anyone's ever gotten lime juice on their hands or their arms when they're out at the beach, maybe from their Corona or their margarita, and then they sort of enjoyed another hour outside, they actually can get a rash from it. So that's been well known to us dermatologists. So this is very interesting to me because I think there could be something to it too. Again, this is kind of an association study. They didn't really look at all the confounding risk factors, and they found that it was only significant in people that ate whole grapefruits and orange juice. Everything else, whole limes, lime juice, whatever, that didn't seem to make a difference. But I would say it's probably because if you think about people's habits, they're probably more likely to have a daily or a more vigorous habit of eating a whole grapefruit or drinking orange juice. And the rest of the citrus kind of comes in little bits and pieces here and there for the most part. But I would say if you have that habit and you're really trying to decrease your risk, you might either want to kick the habit or really up your game when it comes to sun prevention strategies. Otherwise, it might be putting you at increased risk for skin cancer. Stay tuned. That's as much as I know so far. But I think there's a nice, again, anchoring theory or theoretical reason behind it. So just to kind of cap off before I get to any questions you guys might have, indoor tanning and skin cancer. So remember, this does cause cancer. It causes cancer in a group of people predominantly that are otherwise totally healthy otherwise, and it is preventable if they can stay out of the tanning beds. So a little bit ago, about 10% of the population was admitting to using tanning beds. It was typically young, non-Hispanic white females, and if you're tanning before the age of 35, that absolutely increases your risk of melanoma. In fact, just one episode of tanning increases your risk of melanoma by 20%. And if you keep tanning, the more you tan, the more that risk goes up and up. So this is a real thing. Remember, this is 97% UVA rays in these beds. They don't want to burn their clientele, right? So they're using the UVA rays. No burns, just color. But those UVA rays are some of the most dangerous for increasing risk for melanoma, and we are seeing it in the clinics. And then if they look at some studies, they figure about 400,000 cases of skin cancers, that's basal cell, squamous cell, melanoma, can be attributed to indoor tanning use. So this is a big deal. The American Academy of Dermatology, a lot of my fellow colleagues in dermatology, a lot of patients who have suffered from skin cancer, and a lot of advocates, those who have known patients or people who have suffered from skin cancer, have gone to their state legislatures to make real change, kind of like what's happening in Hawaii right now with changing the legislature or the policy for sunscreen for the sake of the environment around them. We are trying to make change so that there is regulation around minor use of tanning beds, meaning people under the age of 18. So if you look at this map, everyone in yellow, including Washington and Oregon, we have regulation that bans completely the use of tanning beds without a doctor's prescription for anyone under the age of 18. So it's a ban. The kind of more, I can't remember, the orange or the purple, those are more either parental consent is required, so anyone can go, but you need a parent either to be with you or a parent to sign off, and or they've got different regulations like under 14 you can't go or under 17 you can't go. The states that are in kind of that light gray, they still have no regulations whatsoever for tanning and minors. We have looked at some data. The CDC has kind of looked at some data as some of this policy has gotten into effect in the last 7 years or so. And they've noticed that the bans are much more effective than the parental consent type of legislature. So just banning it altogether seems much more important. That otherwise, kids are still being able to go in and tan. And there's still some work to be done, obviously, to get some of these other states on board and get a full ban. That's what we'd like to see. I'd like to see tanning beds banned completely, actually. And maybe that will come in my lifetime. But I would think the minor bans across the board and federally would come in the next couple of years. But I said that in 2015, and I'm sitting here in 2018 just telling you about 2 extra states that have added some regulations compared to where I was at that time. So it's kind of moving slow in some ways, but definitely making some progress. So the CDC data from 2009 and 2015, as they look at tanning bed use, remember I told you 10% of people were using them. As they look at high school students, they decreased rates from 15.6 to 7.3%. That's pretty good. And non-Hispanic white female students, those very high-risk group of people that are using a lot of tanning beds, they moved from 37.4% to 15.2%. So we're definitely making progress, and I think the media coverage and the awareness that comes out of this legislation, and even if it doesn't pass, if it goes to the governing boards and gets talked about in the media, I think more and more people will become aware, and I think parents start to become aware, and I think that this hopefully will come, there'll be a cultural shift when it comes to this type of practice. So in summary, we talked about sunscreens. They are safe and they're generally recommended as just one component for skin cancer prevention, including preventing melanoma, but don't forget about those floppy hats and the sunglasses and the UPF 50+ clothing. They're all good. Vitamin D is important, so eat it. And some supplements and dietary modifications might just help with prevention, but stay tuned for the full story. And then tanning bed restrictions for minors. We've got progress, but more work is yet to be done. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done. So this was a couple years ago. This is hashtag sunburn art on social media. And this is the sort of the category of people that I worry the most about. This is after you're a kid and you're under your parents' sort of full control, and before you become a non-invincible adult like myself, and you think that nothing's going to hurt you. These are people that are actually using their sun prevention in ways that sort of make designs on their skin and then intentionally going out to get an intermittent sunburn and then posting it to social media and kind of creating a little bit of a trend. So this really blows my mind, and that group, that kind of teenage, early 20s, that group of people, I think we still have a lot of work to do to get the public campaign and messages out to them. So with that, I'll end, and if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thanks for listening.